All right, everybody, welcome to the show. That was Greta Van Susteren and everybody, and a little clip when she was teasing the story of the release of this sergeant, and that episode is actually now online. You can go watch it over at foxnews.com. Just look it up. You'll be able to find it. So this is actually what we're going to talk about today, and we don't actually have the sergeant with us, but we have somebody just as important, if not, well, I guess. I always put my foot in my mouth, but okay, nobody is more important than anybody. Let me just say that right there. It's Friday. Okay, my stomach isn't feeling good. It's just, I'll blame it on that. Anyway, so today we have a wonderful guest who helped get Sergeant Andrew Tahmooressi freed, and we're happy that Attorney Phil Dunn is with us. Randall, why don't you do the introduction here?
Well, our guest today on Bible News Radio, Phil Dunn, he was a celebrated trial lawyer for more than 30 years in Ventura County, where he defended people in struggling and onerous situations. He's taken the leadership helm at the Serving California Foundation to scale his healing work throughout the state. He's an experienced humanitarian working as a founding member of the Baja Christian Ministries, where he has helped build more than 2,000 homes for people in Mexico. He continues to maintain a private law practice, Dunn and Haney, and for his work on People versus Efren Cruz, in which he proved the innocence of his client and thus overturning a murder conviction and a life sentence, he received a Local Heroes Award from the Santa Barbara Independent and special recognition from the California State Assembly and the United States Congress from Assemblywoman Hannah Beth Jackson and Congresswoman Lois Capps. And as Stacy mentioned, he was very instrumental in securing the release of Marine Sergeant Andrew Tahmooressi. Bill Dunn, thanks for joining us on Bible News Radio.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad that you're on the line. Sure. And it is him on the... Well, how are you doing, Phil? You don't mind if we just call you Phil, right?
No, that's great. I'm doing real well. I'm a very happy man. It was a long, hard struggle for Andrew, and whenever you get an innocent man out of prison, it's a glorious day, and it's not the sort of thing that happens all the time, so it stays with you a while. It's why you get into the business that I'm in, and a lot to do with what our foundation is doing, and that is fighting for justice for the poor, the oppressed, and the widowed and the orphaned. And so that was a great victory, and it was a wonderful thing to be a part of it.
Well, great, and that is quite the victory. And I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more on what a struggle it was. But how did you first become involved in the case of Marine Sergeant?
We have, through Serving California, Mighty Oaks Warriors program, which is probably the only Christian-based program for wounded warriors suffering from PTSD that is Christian-based. And so we actually have recognition from the American military as a faith-based organization where they will send these wounded warriors to our program at Sky Rose Ranch in Paso Robles, California, and they'll do it on orders because of the success of the program. So we've had about 500 men and women come through the program, and there may be something in the neighborhood of 23 suicides of veterans and active personnel a day, but of the 500 we've had come through, we've had no suicides. So we're very proud of that, and it's definitely a Christ-based program, and it really leads these men and women back to the purpose of their life and what God intended for them. And so Andrew's mother, Jill, had contacted Chad Robichaud, the director of our program, about what would Andrew do when he gets out. And so that was the first thing that she was concerned about. But then Chad mentioned the fact that I'd been a criminal defense attorney for 30 years and that I had these connections in Mexico. And so we got together, and I went to Mexico with her, and we hired a real lawyer down there, a guy by the name of Fernando Benitez, who was a really talented Mexican lawyer. And so I went to all the proceedings with Jill, and now that he's out, the intent is for Andrew to participate in our program starting December 3rd. So that's how I got to know Jill, and that's why I was a participant in pretty much all of the proceedings in Mexico.
Oh, wow, that is so cool. So, can you tell us, is Andrew a believer, or his mom?
His mom is a very, very strong Christian woman, and I had the pleasure of praying with her for Andrew and with Andrew over the phone when he was in prison. And while he was in prison, he was regularly cared for by Pastor Luis Benitez, who works with us through Prison Fellowship and Baja Christian Ministries. And Andrew himself would walk around the prison yard singing Onward Christian Soldiers to the rest of the prisoners on occasion with Pastor Luis. So, yeah, he's a Christian. His faith became stronger when he was in prison. And his mother is a very strong Christian woman, and I spent in some of the darker moments a fair amount of time praying with her outside the courtroom and in various locations outside of prison or wherever it may be that our journeys took us. So you bet, very strong Christian family. I'm glad you could share that, because I haven't actually seen a lot of that in any other media. I actually just this morning watched the 18-minute interview that was posted on Fox News that Greta did with him, and I had a hard time not crying, because I'm just so sensitive anyway, because I could just tell he just seemed still in shock. So, and I know that you guys deal a lot with PTSD. I actually have a background as a marriage and family therapist. So I'm pretty familiar with PTSD. But how did that play a humanitarian role in his release? Well, it played a role, but it was not the most significant portion. The case was tried in front of a Mexican judge over a period of 2.5 months, in which a lot of evidence was presented by the defense. And the most significant evidence was the video footage of how he got trapped and sort of sucked in across the border, because you can't get out once you make that wrong turn going towards Mexico. And then the video evidence that we got from the customs officials at the border, which showed that he was actually given the green light to cross over into Mexico, and that he was the one who made the decision to try and stop and find a way to turn around, and that's why he got sent to secondary. So all of the evidence in the case proved that he had no intent in bringing firearms into Mexico, which is a complete defense, a lack of criminal intent. So the judge's order in the case was based on the fact that the prosecution made a decision not to contest that evidence because it was overwhelming, and then so he found that he did lack that criminal intent, and that as a result of the psychological evaluations that were done independently, 3 of them actually, that he suffered from PTSD, which may have been a contributing factor in the rather poor decisions he made that night. So that was definitely a factor, but it was not the preeminent factor. And the real truth of the matter is that the evidence presented in that courtroom is what won the day.
Yeah, that's great to hear. For those of our listeners who've been under a rock or in another country or something.
Hey, none of our listeners live under rocks.
That's true. But
we have great listeners. The woman comes in to defend.
But just for the benefit of our listeners, real quick, you heard a summary there that how this Marine sergeant had taken a wrong turn, ended up crossing the border into Mexico unintentionally. And I remember listening to the 911 call when that was going on. He called, obviously wasn't sure whether he'd crossed the border or not, and his concern was that the Mexican officials were taking the firearms that he declared to them that they wouldn't have known were there unless he'd alerted their attention to it. And it seemed like his concern was that these his legally owned firearms were being taken from him as almost as if a crime was being committed against him. So certainly no criminal intent there. It's just crazy that this thing went on for 200 plus days. Yeah,
the other thing that he tells the story of in his testimony was that literally when, he told them where the firearms were and they tried to unload them and they were unable to do so, so he unloaded them for them. So, it was kind of almost comical in that way. But, that I think is right. That's the things that an innocent man does, okay? And that is he's very cooperative. He is concerned that, he's not going to get his firearms back without realizing, the magnitude of bringing firearms into Mexico is a very serious crime. So there's various political reasons for that, but, he didn't know that and didn't intend it and didn't quite understand why it was such a big deal, but it didn't take him long to figure out it was a big deal.
This story, actually, when I first heard about it, I heard about it on Glenn Beck's network, The Blaze. And I have to say that I'm wondering if the media hadn't got involved, if he would still actually be there, because he actually mentioned in some of his in some of the interview that I watched that there was a number of other Mexican Americans over in Mexico. And I just have to say this one thing. I find it ironic because I used to live in Randall and me just moved from Southern California, living there our whole life. So we're very familiar with California. It's like little Mexico. And you have a lot of illegals coming over from Mexico, and we're not throwing them out. And yet here's an innocent American going into Mexico by accident, and they held him. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, just the irony of it all. And then it concerns me because I've heard a lot of horror stories about Americans going into Mexico and getting thrown into jail. In fact, I remember many years ago listening to KFI, and they were doing a show on that very topic. They were talking. No, it wasn't KFI. It was the KKLA. I think it was Warren Duffy who was doing the show at the time. He asked people to call up and talk about horror stories going into Mexico, and anyway, and it's only because of the media though that I found out about this. Otherwise, I didn't even know there was other Americans being held.
Well, when you have a border with a country, believe it or not, there are, lots of people who cross into our country that are in our prisons because they've committed crimes here. And the same is true in Mexico. Americans do go into Mexico and commit crimes. And one of the biggest and most politically sensitive crimes that Americans commit in Mexico is smuggling guns and firearms into Mexico. So as we have a big problem with drugs coming across the border, they have a real big problem with American-made assault rifles being smuggled into Mexico that are used by the cartels that, cause so much damage there.
Sure.
So their reaction, one of the weapons he had was an assault rifle, and there were 400 rounds of ammunition. So, law enforcement, when they've got that circumstance, I think it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that he was going to get arrested. Now, the problem for Andrew is that his first lawyer and then the lawyer he had after that knew nothing about the Mexican judicial system and were totally incompetent. And in fact, very recently, a very, very similar case occurred, and the individual was released in 7 days because they made the preliminary motions to show his innocence, his lack of criminal intent within that time period, and that person was released. So what happened here is that wasn't done. And so he had to go through an entire trial process before he could be released, and that's what occurred. And then in the end, they made the right decision, and that is he was not convicted. But unfortunately, because of the severity of the charge, he was not allowed to bail out, and therefore he was held the entire time. So, that's really, kind of the other side of it. And the other thing about this is that the people of Mexico, including their left-wing nationalist party, is very concerned, has a reaction to the attitudes of the United States. And what goes on this side of the border, they also have a nationalistic philosophy that causes the politicians in Mexico to be wary of their left wing. So
sure. Well, and I guess for you, having the expert in the area that you do with law, and you understand what's going on over there, which apparently the other attorneys didn't. That makes so much more sense to me as somebody who doesn't have your background or that knowledge. You know what I mean? With the law and all that.
I mean, it's having traveled to Mexico for 25 years and built houses for people who don't have houses and engaged with the poor and the oppressed of Mexico and the humble people that live there. I have a deep heart for Mexico and those people now. The experience I had in their criminal justice system and with their media was, at times frustrating and even horrific. It was just very difficult to understand why they proceeded the way they did. And it's an archaic system that is going to be revised in 2016. So that is a very hopeful thing. But, certainly the procedural problems that held him in as long as he was held, I don't understand why a system would operate like that. There was some politics involved in that, and the judge had to be very, very careful. And this judge right now has taken a big hit in Mexico from the left. Saying like, why did you just why did you cave into American pressure and all of that? And that's really not true. So a lot of the media and the politics and the politicians and the former entertainers and everything that get involved in this stuff, well, it all goes on and on the other side of the border that people try and hijack this and pressure it and use it for their own means. So this really helped keep Andrew in a lot longer than he should have been in.
I was going to say, it sounds, you could just well be describing what happens, on this side of the border, north of the border here in the States, with people will tell you about their difficult experiences with the media and with the judicial system.
All you got to do is watch TMZ, their station, and no, anyway, that's a bad joke.
Yeah, and it was like that in Mexico. I mean, when we would walk from Fernando's office to the courthouse, I mean, there was one point where they just wouldn't even let us move forward. There were so many, and they're just in your face. So, it's just part of our culture, and here, and a lot of that culture is carried over into Mexico, and it's just a very sad thing that justice can be hijacked by cultural media and politicians who wish to make a name for themselves or use it locally in their country to attack the administration, to attack other politicians or a different political party, or and then he becomes a political football, and that's what happened on both sides of the border.
did, and I can see that, and I'm curious. Is it because? Do you think it was a lot of that happened because he was a Marine? And then, of course, my other question is, how is he? I mean, where is he at in his service as a Marine? Is he still in service, or has he been let out yet? I actually don't know, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, he's a veteran, so he's not active duty, and the fact that he was a decorated war hero in Afghanistan and had done 2 tours there, I think is one of the reasons he's out today. So certainly it is the reason why he was not held at La Mesa prison, which is one of the worst prisons in the world, and he was ultimately discharged, released from there to El Hongo and put in kind of an isolation situation where he was safe. So, that's because he was a decorated war veteran, and, for instance, Fox News picked up the story, and you saw the work that Greta Van Susteren did, which, made a huge difference in terms of his personal safety and security by covering it, because then it caused the Mexican government to pay attention to his particular plight and put him in a place where he was safe. So that is, what may not have happened for somebody who wasn't a decorated war hero.
Yeah, it's amazing. Greta has amazed me in recent years. I don't know if she's come to the Lord or not yet, but I can just say she's been out there, talking about persecuted Christians and Pastor Saeed as well as Andrew. And I was surprised, though, because I watched the interview that she did with him, and I was surprised to hear that he said he was shackled to a bed for a month.
Well, he was restrained, and that is not entirely. And I think if you watched the demeanor in which when he stated that, he to some extent was somewhat accepting of what occurred to him, because the simple reality is he tried to kill himself by breaking a light bulb and cutting the carotid artery in his neck. And so when you have someone that has attempted suicide that seriously, what do you do?
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't know that.
So yeah, I mean that is not unlike what would happen in an American prison under the circumstances. You get to a point where there isn't much you can do other than just completely restrain someone. Now, how long and how therapeutic an environment, or what could have been done differently, or the fact that when he tried to escape, he was beaten. All of these things are, things that we would hope would never happen in a prison anywhere, and that people are humanitarians. But the fact of the matter is that in prisons, when people try and escape and when people try and kill themselves, prison officials have a hard time deciding exactly what to do and how to handle it. And so I'm sure that, not everything that occurred here was right, or certainly was not humane. But even Andrew, when you hear that interview, is one of the things I'm very, very proud of him about, is he's saying, I don't want an entire people blamed for what happened to me, because, I think he accepts the fact that he made some mistakes, and there were some people who mistreated him. But, the use of him to create animosity between two peoples is not something he wants.
Yeah, and that's very good. And, well, I think that's a good segue to look forward and to talk.
Can I just say one thing? Yeah. I just want to say, I thought he actually physically looked really good in the interview. So it was apparent he was being fed and stuff, so it wasn't like he was a skeleton or or anything like that. And so I appreciate you clarifying that, because he did mention trying to kill himself, but he didn't actually obviously go in detail. So anyway, go ahead.
Phil, I wonder if you could talk to the liaison, what that is between Serving California and the Mighty Oaks Warrior Program.
You mean in terms of Andrew and what his participation may be? Yeah. We anticipate that he'll be participating in our program December 3rd, which is on Skyros Ranch in Paso Robles, and it's a nice big lodge where we feed and care for them, and we've got all the things that a ranch like that has: horses and motorcycles and ATVs and swimming pools, and it's all for the veterans who have served our country so admirably and have clearly the wounds of war. One of the things that has occurred in the wars that we've been in for the last 12 years is that men and women who are in the military are not just doing 6 months in combat or 3 months like they might have done in World War II. They're doing multiple deployments. So, like, for instance, Chad Robichaux, who is our director of our veterans programs, did 8 tours in Afghanistan. And so the cumulative effect of that much combat in a concentrated number of individuals has caused a much higher rate of post-traumatic stress. And the way in which the VA commonly deals with it is prescription drugs, and they will tell you, they become zombies. And so our approach to it is to confront these men and women with the love of Jesus Christ, and that they need to know where their place is in this world and what their worth is. And this is sometimes a very, very difficult concept, because there's a lot of survivor's guilt, there's a lot of remorse, there's a lot of paranoia and all kinds of trauma. So the program itself, we believe, offers a cure that's not offered anywhere else for these brave men and women who have served their country so admirably. So that is what it is. It's 6 weeks up at Skyros Ranch. The wonderful thing is we have a magnificent founder who owns the ranch, Wayne Hughes, who built this lodge specifically for this purpose and has invested a tremendous amount of his own personal money and time and energy in caring for the veterans coming back from these 2 wars. And today, as I said before, the 500 men and women have come through. We don't have any suicides, and we've yet to have a divorce too. So it's really remarkable. Yeah,
that is awesome. I have to tell you, being in the field of therapy and stuff, I'm not a pro-medication person at all, especially when it comes to PTSD and similar anxiety issues, for the very reason that you stated. And so it's really encouraging to hear about your program, because, it can help in certain cases, but there's a reason people have the trauma. They need a safe place to process it. And I don't know if you're aware, Phil, but there's this show called Cedar Cove. I forgot what network it's on, but they actually did a storyline with a vet that came home from war, and they actually showed how the PTSD worked out and everything. And rather than put him on drugs, they put him into a program very similar to yours.
Yeah, the one thing that's good about it too is it's all peer counseling. So these are all men and women who have gone through it themselves, so they can relate to one another.
Yeah, that's the way it should be, and especially when you talk about marriage. I probably shouldn't say this, but typically the best thing for marriage isn't necessarily marriage counseling. It's being friends with another couple to mentor you and to help you through. That's actually shown to be more effective than actual counseling. But don't tell anybody, okay? Shh, it's a secret. So anyway, do you have any final comments you'd like to make? Tell everybody where your website is too. We can make sure that they can go.
We're at servingcalifornia.org. So that's just the two words .org, Serving California, and we're going at it as strongly as we possibly can for the wounded warriors that have come through, because these great patriotic men and women deserve our best, and our motto is like that of the Marine Corps and the other branches of the service, is that, we leave no one behind. And the great example of that was Andrew Tahmooressi. When Chad first came to me about his situation, that's what he said to me. We can't just leave this guy behind because he's in prison in Mexico. And, having the contacts and some of the talents that I've had over the years and developed, that, we went and got him. And we hope to bring him to Skyros Ranch so that the cause of his predicament can be addressed and that he can find himself in the love of Christ. And that is where we're at. That's what our heart is. And that's, the foundation of our ministry, and in the other portions that we do, both for crime victims and for prisoners who are learning to become pastors while in prison in California. That's a whole nother story. But everything we do is based on the love of Jesus Christ that he had and his calling for us to go out and evangelize the nations. So that's what we're doing.
Amen. Well,
that's great. A big salute to you,
Attorney Phil Dunn. Everybody, thank you so much. You're a hero, and so is Andrew. Keep up the good work.
Oh, that's too kind. All right, thank you.
Everybody, we will be right back.